Okay, calm down.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Katie Halper Show. I'm actually away. I'm traveling right now. I'm in Europe working on a new documentary project about Holocaust survivors who are speaking out against the genocide in Gaza. But I want to stop by to do two things. One is I want to let people know that if you're in Ireland, I'll be doing a live taping of the Katie Halper Show in Dublin on July 24th at 7 p.m. at the Fumbley Stables. And the link to get tickets to this show is in the description below. But the show is about the connection between Palestine and Ireland, and it features special guests who are Palestinian and Irish. And those special guests are Tag Hickey, Danny Morrison, and Asad Abu Shark. And we also have musical guests, Sean Mulroney and Aziz Abu Shark. Now, for tonight's live stream of the Katie Halper Show, we're actually going to be playing an interview that we did a few years ago. And we're doing this because we wanted to honor Jane McAlevey, the great labor organizer and author who died of cancer on July 7th. Jane was a great organizer and a great person, and she will be deeply missed. She already is deeply missed. And to honor her, we're going to play an interview that I did with her and Adolph Reed from November 2020. So rest in power, Jane, and please enjoy this interview. So let's bring in our guests, if they're ready. Can you guys give the thumbs up if you're ready? Okay, that was so in sync. That was great. That's some human, as Jane calls it, human solidarity. So we're going to bring in Jane McAlevey and Adolph Reed. Welcome.
Hi, how are you?
Good, you?
Good.
And I've had Jane on my podcast, but this is her debut on the live stream. Adolph has appeared on the live stream before, and this is Jane's latest book, A Collective Bargain, Unions Organizing and the Fight for Democracy, which is great.
First of all, can we just do away with pollsters? I want to start.
Sure.
I've been on a pollster thing for a long time, and I'm sticking with it, meaning I feel like I was really early to the cause of the idea that pollsters were way overblown and way over important. Some of the highest paid consultants doing some of the least relevant work. So I think I said that in my first book, second book, and third book. And I said it a lot longer than that even, because when I was still working at a, sort of national level at SEIU, there's a lot of polling done. So I had to work with a lot of pollsters. And I have to tell you that the amount of money, this is what my first, itch with pollsters began with watching how much money we spend on them.
Right.
When actually, if you plowed that amount of money into a bunch of organizers, first of all, we have a better read on actually what people are thinking because we're engaging with them. Second of all, we have tighter methods called structure tests, like this whole concept of how you know how someone really feels about something is, are they willing to take some action around it, right? Which is different than like answering your phone.
Right.
So, and then again, like the money was sort of this extraordinary thing. So there was, in No Shortcuts in that second book, I'm sort of touching on the transition away from unions having a lot of organizers to unions replacing them with pollsters. And that's part of why we're in the situation that we're in right now. So it's not, the pollster problem is not just that they blew the last two elections. It's also that their use by national organizations has literally replaced frontline organizers who otherwise spend a lot of time in a serious engagement that's two-way. And where when someone says, something racist or whatever it is, like when someone says something that's, challenging, let's say challenging, steeped in the social conditions from which they're raised. Unlike a pollster, I'm going to actually engage with that person around that topic. And I'm going to actually move to persuasion. So the dollar for dollar value around refielding the country with real organizers and like taking a lot of money back from the whole pollster world. So anyway, that's one thing I want to say is that I just want to say the word pollster because it's making me crazy in terms of the use of resources and what people think they learn from it. The second thing, though, that relates to the sort of the looking backward versus forward. I like the forward. I like to talk about, so what do we do now? But the other thing, and they're related, but the other thing is, I don't think we sort of can make definitive conclusions yet, like deep ones about the voting patterns, because we don't know yet. Like the votes aren't even counted everywhere, right? So I think there's some I mean, what Adolf said, I agree with, right? The aggregate, the big stuff, but there's some deeper stuff that will be interesting to get into, and we probably can't do it till like January. But we know that, yeah, we know everything that you guys said already. And then the thing to add to it is just the lack of organizers is concurrent, right? The replacement with pollsters as a strategy, literally, like in the field, goes along with the whole shift away from sort of radical, and not even radical, like it's almost the wrong word, like fundamentally basic political education that needs to be done inside the House of Labor, which, just is not, it's not happening. A lot of organizations, a lot of unions are scared of engaging in hard conversations with their base. And that is, that's unnerving, for an organizer, because in fact, to what Adolf was saying, I pretty much spend my life waking up in the morning trying to identify on a wall chart which workers aren't talking to us, and that's who I'm going to go talk to for the whole day, right? Like it's that focus is what organizers do. We engage in really hard conversations all the time, like regularly. If we want to win a hard-fought election, we're going to spend almost all of our time engaging with workers who don't think initially that they're for the union or for the strike or for the collective action. They're deeply embedded in, a sense of individualism has gotten into their head, and maybe more than that. And the challenge for us in this work is, if both sides are getting better at mobilizing, right, which they are, right, the forces of Trump turned out a hell of a lot more people, and the quote unquote Democrats turned out a hell of a lot more people. So the problem is it's still really, really close. And if we don't do far more actual organizing and spend our time having really hard conversations that most organizers I know love having on a daily basis, because it's satisfying, right? When you conclude a conversation like that and you realize someone's actually thinking differently, then we're going to keep having this, ridiculously close country. I don't actually think, yes, it's a racist country. Yes, there's misogyny, all that stuff, but I don't actually think it is as close on the issues, right? 80 million people sat out the election. Like, what were those 80 million people thinking, and why didn't they vote? Like, I'm really interested in the 80 million who are not in the 71 or 75 million number yet. Right. And that's where we should be focusing our energy.
I also realized that I forgot, because you guys are such celebrities, but for the few people watching who may not know who you are, Adolf Reed is a scholar, professor emeritus at Penn, and the founder of one of the founders of nonsite.org. No site?
Well, no,
not a founder. Like Pictionary.
I'm on the board. Yeah,
you're on the board. Okay. Well, I associate you with that site. Okay. So, and that's of course, I'm giving a Katie centric definition, so I shouldn't do that. But one of the big contributors, right there. And Jane is also a scholar and a labor organizer and an author. So very excited. I have so many more questions for you guys. But Anders, take it away.
Well, yeah. I'm curious. You're talking about Jane was talking about organizers being replaced with pollsters, and do you think there are like structural incentives for that? I mean, I think it's pretty clear with the Democratic Party that it's better for, if you're a consultant, to hire pollsters and to cut ads. You get a better overhead. But is that sort of starting to bleed over into union leadership too, in your experience?
But it's not starting to bleed.
Okay.
We're bleeding out. You know what I mean? It's very, very, it's very deep. And even now when I still work every single day with workers and unions. So it's like, if I'm working with a group of workers and unions, and I say to people, if I ask a question like, what do you think your members are thinking about Prop 22, or a tax ballot initiative or whatever, and they'll say, oh, well, we have an engagement program. That's a big buzzword right now, is the word engagement. It's like, if I hear that word one more time, I'm going to put my head in the oven. It's like, we've got an engagement program. And I'm like, okay, that's a big new word. The pollsters must have come up with it. So I'm like, what's an engagement program? And they'll be like, well, we've engaged the members around this question. I'm like, oh, that's great. Okay. So how did you engage the members around the question of the ballot initiative? And they'll say, well, we dropped a survey in the field and asked a lot of questions. And I'm like, okay, I have to keep clarifying. Like, you dropped a survey in the field. That's like a one-way. No, we did it really good. Like, you could write back and you could type in and you could, and I'm like, that's actually that's just bullshit in terms of moving a serious program. So again, when I was at SEI, I'll give you one concrete example. So it's 2006 in Nevada, and I'm executive director of the statewide union, SEIU at the time, in Nevada, which we would, by the way, flip, blue that year for the first time in a bunch of years. But anyway, I mean, in 2008. But so it's 2006. We've done a huge rebuild of the union. We went from like this dead, small C kind of corrupt, small B bankrupt-ish, just bad local. We've rebuilt it. It's this fighting mad organization. We've organized thousands of new workers, and we've rebuilt, the internal side of the union that existed. And so I reported to some whatever structure in the hierarchy that we were going to run a huge dues increase. And I mean a big one, like triple the dues, meaning the amount of money that each worker is going to pay out of their paycheck. And it's a right to work state. And so I get this phone call from headquarters and they say, you can't run a dues increase. So this is like the most counterintuitive thing you could possibly imagine, right? So I said, okay, first of all, you can't actually stop us, right? We have a local constitution. So we're going to run a dues increase because we actually wanted to be financially liberated from the headquarters, right? We were like getting subsidies and stuff. So we were like, actually, we're going to run it because my people in the organization said the first thing you got to do, McAlevey, as soon as it's safe, is like run a dues increase to get independent from headquarters. So we were going to run a huge dues increase to get independent of the national subsidies. And because it was the right thing to do, because we had a hell of a fight coming in front of us. We had a war coming in 2006 in the union, and we needed more resources. And I didn't want to have to like constantly negotiate with Dennis Rivera, who was a key leader in the healthcare sector, about the terms of what an additional subsidy was going to be, right? There's like really deep stuff. So anyway, fast forward. So I'm like, they're like, how do you know you're ready? And I'm like, well, I know we're ready because the dues paying membership is already at 88% in a right to work state. Like people are feeling really great about the organization. And we know it from the ratification votes. We know it from our turnout at every strategic function in the union. And they said, we're going to drop a poll. That's all the lingo, right? Like, well, we're going to drop a poll to make sure it's okay. And I was literally going back to the local executive board and my organizing staff and like, blowing my brains out over this conversation. But I was like, fine, that's cool. You want to run a poll, waste your money on something that we already know from turnout at ratification votes, from unionization. Like there's all these metrics that are evidence-based when you're an organizer in the field. So anyway, they dropped the poll. It was $120,000. They survey sampled, I think, 300 people, so 300 conversations, in excess of $100,000 of money to a consultant firm who reported back that they had never in their life gotten a response that was like, I forget the number, I say it in Raising Expectations, but it was like, 80% of the members were ready to vote to seriously increase their dues in the union, because the whole conversation we were having about dues was not about dues. It was about, do you want to kick your boss's ass, save your pension, and win? Right. That's the framing of the question. And people were like ready for it. Anyway, so we wasted all this money on a poll that confirmed what we already knew.
That's
so that's
better than what you
2006.
And that's better what often happens, which is that the poll doesn't even reflect popular will, right? Because you have a self-selecting population that's responding to it, right? Or, they're often weaponized polls to maintain the status quo. Because if you poll people at the beginning of someone's campaign, and the person isn't well known, then of course you use that to say the person isn't viable.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah.
But to Andrew's point, one is it's being replaced for several reasons, and that was a mind-blowing thing for me to realize, that getting off of the subsidy and becoming independent was actually a challenge, right, to leadership in some ways. It meant less control over how we spent money, and then secondly. And of course, we did win that dues increase, right? It was huge. We suddenly had like triple the money we had. Anyway, the workers, had a lot of money to fight, and then we won. So, the boss fights we had, we then won. But the other thing, obviously, is that when you have really good organizing going on in the field, that has its own set of threats, right? So, and pollsters don't do that. So,
and that's perplexing to me about that they would do that with Prop 22. Like, is that the implication there then, that if the result of the poll had been like the workers were kind of okay with Prop 22 or not that invested in it, then the union wouldn't have opposed it?
No. And this wasn't about Prop 22. It was about Prop 15. It was about the ballot.
Okay.
I think, and officially, by the way, the unions here did, in California, the unions did, I think, politically did an amazing job on, they tried hard. I think the pandemic really got in the way. But I think that one thing that is true about unions in California is that by and large, people had very good positions on 22, very good positions on trying to eliminate the corporate loophole from Prop 13 in the Prop 15 campaign. And I think, we could talk about that separately, but I think the pandemic was very damning because the number one population that we were relying on, the two populations that we were going to rely on to campaign around breaking Proposition 13 historically in what was now called Proposition 15, and it was just officially declared that we couldn't overcome the defeat today. That teachers and schools and education and then our access to parents was like the central strategy. And of course, all the schools closed in March. So in some ways, the base of operation of the theory of the campaign got fundamentally challenged in the end. And that was really problematic.
How much evidence is going to have to be accumulated that what we understand to be anti-racist politics is boldly and explicitly and openly a class politics of its own, right? How many special Oscar categories are we going to have for fucking Ava DuVernay, right? But before people start to recognize that that's what's going on here, right? So we've got the idea of a black political agenda, for instance, that's got like a sort of populist throwaway issue or populist seeming throwaway issue with the criminal justice stuff, right? Which what I was just I mentioned to somebody a couple of days ago, like a defunder, that polls show that most Black Americans and most Hispanic Americans want police because, as my son was saying, like all you got to do, like if you own a TV and a car, like you want to have someone pick up on the other end when you dial 911, right? I mean, that's as simple as it is. And not to mention that going back to the 90s, part of the justification for the crackdown on crime was demands coming from economically marginal Black and Hispanic communities, where people, like you could see, they were calling in an airstrike on themselves, which does not end very well, but you only do it out of desperation. Right, but there's that, right? That's the stop, because everybody understands it on some level. Just like there's not going to be any damn reparations, there's not going to be any prison abolition or police abolition either. But what there is, on the other hand, is a lot of money going into the Black bourgeoisie, right? I mean, after George Floyd was killed, we counted up like a handful of the most a couple of handful of the most repugnant corporations in America: Uber, Amazon, Walmart, ALEC even, right? Came on support of Black Lives Matter. Kimberly Crenshaw, the crown priestess of the idea of intersectionality, said, as a rebuke to the left, right, that corporate CEOs are more in touch with the needs of African Americans than the left is, because for her and others in that class, African American interests don't include stuff like healthcare, right? But it's only disparities, and that's another marker of they're having a class agenda. So again, I mean, to be honest, like see at this point, and this is like, a virtue or a curse of being old and tired. But at this point, when somebody presents that to me as a claim, right, that you can't organize around class issues, my first response is to say, I catch it most of the time. It's, well, go fuck yourself then, because that's because it's just not true.
Yeah,
right?
That's a good answer.
And I mean, most people who make that argument are, well, look, like it depends. So between 2016 or 2015 and 2020, there had been the case earlier too, but the working class got completely redefined by race and gender, right? So the working class is white men, And the working class, therefore, by definition, is racist and sexist and transphobic and homophobic and bigoted white men. So by definition, and this is what Joanne Reed and the rest of the MSNBC crowd were doing, and also the black political class. It got to the point after the 2016 election where if you propose something like Medicare for all, or like any social wage policy that's broadly redistributive downwardly, then that was automatically taken or castigated as showing that you wanted to cater to the racist white working class. It's a good game if you can run it, but see, here's the problem, right? I'll shut up after this. The problem is that everybody alive today, and the older they are, the more likely it is to be the case. So like my cohort has it worse than anybody else, and people who are my senior, the handful of them who are left, have it still worse than we do. But it all came up during a time when it was reasonable to assume that a racial justice agenda or the social movement agenda was an intrinsically left agenda. And that's partly because for a period there, through the mid-30s through the mid-60s, the aspirations of all those movements kind of rode together and converged. And biographically, right, the same people were involved in them. And kind of ironically, one of the reasons that it has been natural to think of the racial justice agenda as a left agenda is because for a good generation, the only people, right, outside the affected communities who supported those movements' agenda were actual leftists, right?
Right.
But just because they ran parallel tightly for a couple of generations doesn't mean that there's anything that's necessarily left about the racial justice agenda. For instance, I think I may have mentioned this on your show last time too, but Preston Smith, a political scientist in Mount Holyoke, has been arguing for a while very quite powerfully that from the mid-30s forward, you could see like two distinct normative nodes in Black American activist politics. One converged around an ideal that he describes as racial democracy, which just boils down to radical application of equal opportunity, right? And its ideal is that Blacks, that we'll know that we have a just society when Blacks are represented, más o menos, in proportion to their overall of the percentage of the population at the top and the bottom and all points in between. The other norm that fired Black mass politics was the social democratic norm, and like everybody understood, right? Like even sort of conservative Black voices, right? Like in the mid and late 40s, that among the conditions that were necessary, or that would be necessary, and were necessary and would remain that way for continued Black advancement after World War II, were continued expansion of social wage policy and expansion of the CIO, right? Because people weren't stupid, right? But this is also a time when people actually, one of your campmates, who's my advisee, in a seminar, was leading a report or a class discussion about in a grad course on a bunch of readings from Black political and intellectual types, mid-30s, mid-40s, and she began just by observing, right? I mean, not making. She was a little bemused about it, but by observing that nobody talked about combating racism. Ralph Bunche, A. Philip Randolph, Willard Townsend, people talked about policies and programs and initiatives that they were for, and policies, programs, and initiatives that they were opposed to, right? And so, from that sense, like the struggle against a generic racism is also a product of the last 30, 40 years, right? And it's a direct product of the consolidation of bipartisan Reaganism that makes it impossible to fight for anything else, right? And it's important to keep in mind that the Black political and managerial class congeals, right, and evolves precisely in the context of that transformation, and has been an active node in the transformation. So I forget where we started now. Like I've taken.
It was my question about why people present. Yeah. And Jane, you talked about this. I just listened to you on. I heard your Rumble interview with Michael Moore, and this issue also came up.
I mean, this is part of why I was interested in, hanging out with Adolf. I feel like I keep thinking we need to write something about this, but instead we're chatting tonight. But it's like
First step.
We're working on the outline now. But I mean, to me,
is this a shortcut to the?
No. This is a long form cut.
Okay.
I'm kidding. But I mean, as you know, as a union organizer, to me, I have like 28 years of stories of helping someone with what we might consider to be, racist and sexist. Let's just start there. Could be anti-queer, whatever it is, like challenging views. Go through a union campaign that's a hard fought, well run campaign, and then this important. Then go through a hard-fought contract campaign, which is where the policy mechanism comes in, right? That's the policy tool. Like, what policies do we want to change with this employer in the workplace? So we get two chances, and then every unionization campaign, every contract fight, every strike vote, all these things that are real and hard, where there's real opposition, and they are plying the tool of race and gender at us in the campaign. Like, it doesn't generally work, because in fact, when you can bottom line a conversation with a worker, that's what are the three things you want to change at work tomorrow? Like that's the opening question. Like in every conversation I've had for whatever, 20, 30, I'm getting too old, years. Like, if you could change three things at work tomorrow, what would they be? If that's my opening conversation with a Filipina, a Black person, a Latina, a Latinx, a queer, a fill in the blank, then I'm not going to ask, well, what do queer people want in the workplace today? I'm going to ask a worker who's a worker, if you could change three things at work tomorrow, what would they be? Because in fact, every worker has an answer to that. And if I'm holding from the three things that worker wants to change, the next part of the conversation, step 4 in a 6-step conversation, the next, like we frame the choice about what it's going to take to win that. So if someone says to me, I don't want to lose the pension and get a 401k because the boss is threatening a takeaway on a pension, and they want to, make them all go into some crappy 401k or 2-tier, meaning people who don't know what that means, like every new hire is going to get a worse contract than the sitting workers, right? Which is typical divide and conquer. Also, the conversation continues in a way where you say, look, the truth is, in order for you to save the pension and stop it from converting to a 401k, it's going to take like 90% unity. So it's going to take like because it's a power equation, right? And then you begin to get into a conversation about capitalism and a power equation with the worker, and you're not talking about capitalism, but you are talking about a power equation in a pretty simple way, because you're going to ask the worker, well, the employer is really dead set on taking that pension away. So what do you think it's going to take actually for you and your coworkers? What kind of actions do you think you and your coworkers might have to take collectively to actually stop the employer from doing that? And in that conversation, we're unpacking, I'm talking to a white nurse who's saying, I wish the Filipinos would stop speaking in Tagalog. And you're talking to, I can make all these stereotypes that are really real. And the point is, at the end of it, I always say, like, then we're getting to a strike vote, and the white nurse will be like, well, the Filipinos aren't going to vote to strike for the pension because they're going to get sent back to the Philippines. I mean, this is like, my ears are filled with this stuff. And then if I look at them and I say, look, the truth is, for any one of you to win on any issue that matters, y'all going to have to put your shit aside and get it together here. Right. And we're going to get into a really healthy conversation about what that means and why is the employer plying you, using racism and the language you speak and the color you are and the status you have to try and stop you from making radical fundamental change to win the things you deserve. Like, that basic conversation leads to the most effective anti-racism work I've ever witnessed, and anti-sexism and anti-fill in the blank. It's like peeling back the onion layer, which gets to the root of what the problem here is, which is we got a political elite that's trying to kill every worker who's not them in this world at this point, not just this country. So, I think there is a part of the historic, like, white male sectarian straight, I'm making some weird categories, but like there is some weird history where, I've been in rooms where people are like, we shouldn't even talk about race. We shouldn't even talk about, that's like a fraction of like a flea on an elephant. You know what I mean? It's like, that isn't real. And it's stupid if you say that, right? But it's like, you can't deal with race or gender or other isms unless you're dealing with it through the prism of class. Because that's how we're actually going to help someone come to the realization that actually you and I are not the issue. Actually, the problem is not you and I and what we think of each other. It's these assholes who are shareholders and vulture capitalists who are trying to take something away from every single one of you. So why do you think that is? Like, that's the nature of a beautiful, fun, great, hard organizing conversation. And I've written 3 books of stories already. I could just keep writing them, like about how many minds have been transformed about maybe Tagalog isn't the problem. And maybe the Filipino nurse isn't the problem, thanks to the white nurse at the end of that campaign. And in fact, they've built deep, lasting, fundamental solidarity and now have a platform to discuss those weird tensions that they sometimes have, which are rooted in their sort of social upbringing. And they work through them. Because if you want to win some serious material conditions and change in your life, you got to work it through or you can't win. And so, this discussion makes me batshit crazy in real life all the time.
Yeah.
Do you think, though, like looking back through the history of the left and, fighting racist organizing, whether it's like the Ku Klux Klan or the American Nazi Party, that there are things we can learn today about like disrupting fascist organizing, not to, be too alarmist, but, is that something we should totally abandon? Because, it seems like in a lot of cases, the left or the liberals can sort of latch onto those things and organize people on those lines without any class orientation. And if we were able to do that with a class orientation, that would make things stronger. Is there any validity to that?
Well, I don't know. Look, like on the one hand, and I know this isn't what you're asking, but on the one hand, like I've been kind of not even bemused, maybe a little amused about what I've seen to be like a tendency among sort of earnest DSA types in particular to want to look to the past for like Shitankowski, for instance, that can help to inform how we should think about the circumstances that we face now, the challenges that we face now. And it tickles me for a couple of reasons. One is that, like, when I came into the left as a young person, Kautsky and his figures in the Second International were trash, basically. So something changed, but that's just a biographical thing.
I think the vast majority of socialists today are still not Kautsky's fans, but there definitely are some stalwarts there. But
and I've never heard a worker in a campaign say Kautsky, just for the record.
No, exactly.
They're like complaining that, like, we don't like that the Filipino women are speaking Tagalog, and we also don't like the obsession with Kautsky. So we've got to fight against both of those things.
I'm not going to participate in the strike vote because Kautsky's not on the ballot. That is not what happens. Okay, I'm sorry. Back to you.
But the thing is that that's so people like call that learning from history, right? I call it going to the past looking for parables. And that sort of gets in the way. Like I mentioned Kautsky in particular, not just because I'm not crazy about Kautsky, but
Kautsky folk.
Because everything about the world we live in now, right? And everything, every conceivable thing, right? About political institutions, life in general, world markets, et cetera, presumes that the world that Kautsky lived in and commented on and tried to operate in has been obliterated completely, right, off the face of the earth. So it doesn't bring anything to us. But by the same token, and look, I'm as inclined to sort of to the temptation to duck into the bullet of fascism as like anybody else is, right? I mean, I've been a student of fascism in the 20s and 30s, partly because I grew up as a red diaper baby here, right? But the conditions aren't the same, right? So, and then I go back to point number one, which is that there is no left, right? There's no institutional left in the U.S. So the institutional left can't do anything about the fascist threat now because it doesn't exist. And this is like a frustration that I experience on a daily basis. I'm sure we all do. You can see it coming. I just saw this afternoon. Somebody sent me a video of an Alex Jones apparently is organizing a big convergence on DC to make America great again and save Trump.
Oh, is that the Million MAGA March, or that's different?
Million MAGA March.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm trying to remember what they called it. And I'm hoping it blows up in their face. But this could be some really, ugly stuff, and the really rocky road we're in for. What the left can do about that? Look,
talk to a lot more workers.
Yeah, right. Well, no, it's the only thing you can do. Yeah,
right? Seriously, like,
it is.
When people say to me, why are white working class versus like the working class, which is, as we know, completely multiracial and everything else. But like when people say, why do white working class people, have racist ideas or, vote for Trump or whatever. And it's like, it's like, well, first of all, a whole lot of people, voted for him across the board, but that's really deeply problematic. But the truth is, it's because we've deunionized the United States, and we have created a level of inequality that's spread out across everyone in some pretty serious universal ways. And so, and we're in a really racist, it's like a racist country. Foundation of the First Division, of course, was race in terms of dividing and conquering the working class. We know this, but in some real terms, we know. Then there's real evidence about this. Like, it's like when a white worker is in a trade union, their views are radically different than when they're not in a trade union. And so for all the complaints, I opened up my new book. My opening line of the new book is, unions are such a pain in the ass, because I just wanted to get it out of the way and then get to why unions mattered. Like, I literally have that as the opening sentence because I just wanted to be like, yes, sure. Okay, fine. Now let's get to the depth of what it means that you deunionized the country, neoliberals, strategically. And part of what it has resulted in is a lot more sort of white grievance and a lot of racism. That's easier to tap into because, in fact, people are not sitting in a union hall having conversations about what it's going to take to win the contract that's going to change the terms and conditions of their lives in fundamental and radical ways. So, like, I don't think... I'm not personally interested, and I'm sure this will be, alienate me from some people who are watching this, but like, I don't think it's helpful when there's like, anarchists looking at my friends, plenty of people I know out in the streets in New York City last week, fighting at night with cops. And then the images on the TV, and on social media are like cops in riot gear, like throwing bicycles at people, and these nights of skirmishes that were going on, that actually isn't working very well for ordinary people. Like, it's actually just not. And so if what we're trying to do is win the masses to the work that we're doing, it's not about that kind of street fighting. It's actually about serious engagement. And that goes back to seriously reinvesting in the field and really putting resources into the kind of organizing that, I was trained in. I didn't invent it. I was trained in it I was mentored by really good organizers. In every organization that I've worked in every union, the level of solidarity is super high. because we're actively, constantly campaigning to fight, to raise expectations, to fight for real gains. And in any real fight to win serious gains, you simply can't do it without 90% unity. So what's it take to build 90% unity? It's like, that's the ongoing, constant conversation about why I think the best place to fight racism and to fight sexism and to fight misogyny is from the House of Labor. It's like from inside of a class-based movement that actually teaches people who the fucking problem is, which is not each other. It's the boss and the system that created the boss, you know? So it's just, it's maddening.
That's more effective than asking people to check their white privilege.
Yeah, I have to follow up just on a couple of small points, and it really is a follow-up. The last few years I was teaching, I would, and it really didn't matter what the class was. I would do it like for all of the undergraduate classes, no matter what. But I'd find a way to bring up, the fight over Chinese exclusion on the West Coast. In the late 19th century. And I'd make this point, because everybody knows, the story, mea culpa, the white workers were so racist, they hate the fucking Chinese. So I said, okay, so look, Leland of Stanford and the other railroad operators and growers announced public campaign, that they wanted to import Chinese workers because, for racial reasons specifically, they believed that those workers could live on less than so-called Native American workers, which is what the white workers were then called. All right. So I say to them, so imagine yourself as a Native American white worker in 1870, hearing this argument coming from the employers. How do you respond? Well, the first thing is, like, you respond to the terms that the fucking employer sets for the fight. Right, but you never hear that side of it, right? I mean, not even from the lefty labor historians you hear, right? Because everybody's participating in what Kant called the logic of the trial, right? So we go and look at the past to see who we can find, was guilty of racism, right, sexism, whatever. So that's one thing. But I have another story to offer too before I make my other point. If it's okay, it's fairly brief. Like almost exactly a year ago, plus a week or two, I was in South Carolina on a labor swing for the campaign, and at a steelworkers local in Georgetown, which is a little south of near Myrtle Beach, two vocal white rank and filers were there. One is a guy. He looked like he was probably my age. Probably wasn't. He said he grew up on a farm, and he was dumb as fucking rocks, right? So all that he said was, bring back the manufacturing jobs, kick out the immigrants, right? Illegal immigrants. So you ask him what time it was, and like those are his responses. So after a little bit, I just let him go. But the other guy, he worked in a paper mill, and it's about 40 something, I think. And his thing was, he says, well, so what I like a lot of what I see in Sanders' economic program, but the thing I don't understand is why do Democrats always get caught up in, or let themselves get caught up in what he called these moral issues? So I tried to tease that out a little bit. And, he didn't say specifically, but we knew what they were. So we sort of tiptoed around, and I tried to do the, pluralism thing with him. But what kind of stopped him in his tracks a little bit was, I said, well, so which is more important to you, right? That you have access to health care and a decent retirement, or that no woman ever be able to have an abortion, or that you have rights on a job and a pension, or that no two gay people or no two same-sex people can ever get married. And it stopped him in his tracks, because he's a decent guy, for just enough that as Jane says, like, if I feel confident enough that somebody who has standing with him in his life, right, were to continue pushing on this, and over time they could move. And the last thing was, I said, look, I noticed somebody on your shift that you can't stand, right? You can't wait to get off so you don't have to see this asshole again till the next time you come to work. But I also bet you that on union issues, like as much as you might hate that guy's guts otherwise, so you can find a way to deal with each other to get the work done, right? But so that's another petty illustration, like of what having the personal contact can do. But the big point I wanted to make was with respect to Trump having hit this vein of deep-seated white working-class racism. There's still this problem that the McWilkeites of whatever stripe have, which is that in 2016,
Wilkie?
Mick Wilkie.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought you were Mick Wilkie as in like Wendell Wilkie or something.
Oh yeah, no, Mac Wilkieite.
Okay, Mick Wilkie.
And Mac is not a hamburger, it's McCarthy.
Oh,
It's not a McAlevey. Just saying.
Right,
Go ahead.
yeah.
No, totally not. Nor is it McDonald, which is my family. But anyway, between 6.5 million and a little over 9 million people who voted for Trump in 2016 had voted for Sanders in the primaries and Obama at least once. And one of the lines that the McWilkieite talking heads are going to give you is that, well, they tried to conceal their racism by voting for Obama. And right, so it makes no fucking sense. But
None.
But
In the voting booth in private, they were trying to, yeah.
But when you tease it out a little more and think about Obama and think about Trump, and it was not an uncommon response that people made to family members and the like who were appalled that they voted for Trump this time to say, well, I voted for Trump for the same reason I voted for Obama, right? Because what Obama offered all really was that he, coming out of the Great Recession, he would make our lives better.
That's right.
Because he embodied literally a kind of progressivism that was an ethereal thing, right? It didn't have any concrete substance, but because of who he was, his person, and his racial person in particular, because that's where the whole first black president, idolatry thing played into this. I still want to hold out a little bit for the Warren Harding, but because I don't want to take his place in history. But Trump offered the same thing, right? Trust me because of who I am, my person, and ultimately my racial person, right? Will bring the deliverance to you, right? So in that sense, and I know like Charles Blow and the rest of the middle brow media on their best days, middle brow, all full of Trump is the expurgation of the black presidents, and so forth and so on. But from my perspective, or from the perspective I've suggested here just now, they're two sides of the same coin. They both stand for the evacuation of content, right, from our politics and redefinition of populist progressive insurgency in ways that are not only totally unmoored to any discrete political program, which works out quite well, but in both cases do all of their delivering for the ruling class. So here we are. Oh, actually, I want to say one more thing while I have the floor, kind of. That on the polling stuff, like Jane and I have been singing two-part harmony on that polling shit since probably before we knew each other. But like I wrote a fair amount about the 2004 race, just because people like Rick Perlstein and others asked me. But so like we see the Democrats have been doing the same thing over and over and over. They've become more and more dependent on the pollsters and political consultants more and therefore more and more inclined to make up these magical, fantastic constituencies. Like I hadn't heard the Patagonia Democrats thing before, but whenever I hear it or see it, I remember the first time that I ever heard of and walked into a Patagonia, which was at Union Square, and I just thought this was the sickest shit I'd ever seen in my life. But we got to figure, and a lot of the commentators and the political scientists who examine this see a conundrum, right? Because from a reasonable perspective, you can see that in principle, like this stuff wouldn't pay off over time, and in practice, it hasn't paid off. But the problem with the intellectuals is that they just think that if there's something that they don't understand, it's because the people who are doing it are dumb and like need to have it explained to them. But if you assume that democratic or decision-making democratic elites are as basically smart as we are, then the problem can't be that they can't recognize what's happening, but there's something else that's blocking them. And what that comes down to is where the Republicans, after Goldwater's defeat, were able to go underground and work for years on fine-tuning constituencies and field testing messages and bundling them in ways that enable them to put together a fundamentally revanchist popular electoral constituency, but a governing but around a set of issues that have nothing at all to do with the economy, and to put that together with the upper class economic interest that they'd all or the right wing financial and other economic interests that they'd always been connected with. Like the Democrats hadn't done that, hadn't been able to do that. So much of the Democrats' electoral base is made up of working people who need and want some kind of redistribution. That's what sends them out trying to find a magical constituency, right every time. So that as what's his name, the former mayor and former governor Schumer and Rendell said in 2016, right? For every blue collar vote they lose in West Pennsylvania, they pick up two versions of that woman who's like an economics professor at Drew, who's a Republican, but she was going to vote for Clinton because her son is autistic, and there's no room for him in Donald Trump's world. Like I watched those commercials because we were battleground states, so they're pumping this shit all day long, and the Democrats ran two commercials, that one and the grab them by the pussy commercial. I'm thinking, really, this is going to win Pennsylvania? Really, you think this is going to win it? So, but they've got to do it because they've got to find a way to sell the rest of us a bill of goods, right? While they, deliver the country for Wall Street, and in that sense, are kind of like the Whigs in the 1840s, right? I mean, they can put together a viable enough electoral coalition to come close to winning, like every time, and win maybe every third or fourth time, and that keeps the hope alive until it doesn't. But I've been waiting for the Democrats to collapse under the weight of their own contradictions, like the Whigs, for like 30 years. I didn't want it to happen this year, because the outcome wouldn't be good. But so anyway, okay, I'm sorry, but that's what to make that.
Jane, you have any?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like thinking about 2022, and what the consequence is going to be in the midterms.
Right.
If they actually just do jack shit, like if nothing is really fundamentally done, if what the Democrats do is form like 20 commissions, right? They're really good at commissions. Like, let's form a commission on police behavior. Let's form a commission on pre-existing conditions. Let's
Yeah.
form a commission on, and it's going to take that commission like 6 months to get together,
Right.
and then like a year. And by the way, there is actually a strategic way to do a commission, by the way, but it's not the kind of commission they're talking about. Like there in the years, I think when I first met Adolf, when I was desperately trying to find experts who understood anything about something called Hope 6 and housing and public housing rules, and because I didn't know anything about it, I was a union organizer, and we're getting stuck in this big, they're trying to demolish all this housing, right? So, we created a blue ribbon commission on affordable housing that was super strategic. And I was co-chairing it with, at the time, a young Roger Van, who would go on to work with Vangelis and whatever in the better years of the NAACP,
Mm-hmm.
that is. So he and I were like co-chairing this commission because the labor movement had enough power to get the right people seated. So we like set up the commission, and then what we do with it? We just took like state money and the imprimatur of the state and began to like do walkthroughs of every neighborhood. We held hearings. We went into neighbors' houses. We dragged elected officials and the media in tow, like into the beautiful housing that they wanted to tear down, that they said was like rat infested. And in fact, it was not at all rat infested. It was actually quite not, whatever. So there is a strategic commission, but that's not what these guys are going to do. So I'm already freaking out thinking about like the implications in the midterm elections, and then in 2024, let alone 2028. And what more bad politics and do nothingism is going to set us up for in 2022 and even 2024 is mildly terrifying for me at this point, right? Like there's going to be potentially a return to some really bad, whether it's Trump again or whoever the hell it is coming after him. It's like he is not going away, and they're not going to go away. So I'm deeply concerned, about the mamby-pamby sort of the failure of imagination that the Biden people and whoever need to get in there and actually win some stuff that is both material and real and substantial, that then gives any hope to getting an even more progressive agenda in 2022, let alone holding on to and or winning something better in 2024, let alone seriously going backwards. That is a sort of terrifying thought to me. I think there's so much work to be done. And it's almost like as we're having the conversations about what's happening right now, we haven't even talked about literally like that rally or anything else, but like this idea, like the Supreme Court, okay, let's just, whether or not there was ever a court packing, the wrong word, whether or not there was going to be an enhancement, an expansion on the court, that's off the table. So no matter what, like even Joe Manchin probably wouldn't even vote for it, let alone Susan, whatever. So, but when you start to think about the parallel reality of what's going to be going on at the Supreme Court, like how many things are going to be rolled back right now for workers and worker rights, just for starters, let alone civil rights, let alone women's rights, let alone like all those rights that people are worried about. Like there's going to be a parallel agenda going on where they are just stripping us backwards. They're going to strip us backwards at the Supreme Court in a pretty profound way. Whether or not they move on the Affordable Care Act, all the mumbo jumbo today, it's like, well, yeah, because if they took away the Affordable Care Act now, it would actually set us up to sort of make a big run for Medicare for all in a better way, right? So like the lesser of two evils for a middling Supreme Court right now in a pandemic, maybe that they don't kill that thing. But it's. So I just think we're sort of, when you look at the deeper power structure analysis of what we're facing and what we're up against, the census, the Supreme Court, mealy-mouthed people who are sitting in the middle in the Senate, and in the, even if we win Georgia, which I got to say is some wishful thinking. It's like saying we're going to take Texas in 2020. Like we should be investing in Georgia on the ground in real base organizations, right? Which I keep tweeting what these base organizations are. We need to build for Georgia, but the idea that we're going to pull 2 seats out of Georgia, it's just wrong-headed. So it's made a lot of pollsters and a lot of money and everything we're saying on steroids. But we could actually make some real gains if we approach the work like organizers. So for us to live to fight another day in a serious way, we're actually going to have to pull some real wins And the Supreme Court is going to be this like backward sucking sound to everything that we're doing. So I need to note like that the power structure is deep right now.
So how do
Deeply
we
set
do
against
that,
us.
or how to organize or do
Yeah,
that?
I think that's right. I think, and if we can't, then I think the most likely outcome for 2024, if not sooner, is like a more competent and more efficient version of Trump. And like another thing to think about too, is right now we're in this kind of funny moment where so what Trump wants to do is create enough chaos that the ruling class, right, will just say, okay, too much, right? What we know to this point is that, and I think this is one way to read. Like I found it a little reassuring. This is you touch at straws. How all of the corporate media covered the election, right? Even Fox in its own way.
Yeah.
So that made it pretty clear that the signals that they're getting from the national security apparatus or whoever the fuck else is they listen to, think that this coup thing is like a bad idea. All right, but see, here's the problem though. I mean, take people like Elon Musk, Bezos.
Do we have to? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, right.
Well, yeah.
No, really,
well,
take my wife.
Yeah,
Take my
take
Elon
my
Musk.
Musk.
Yes,
Yeah.
and pass them over to the NKVD. But the people who have sort of come forward, right, as part of even Kimberly Crenshaw's cohort of woke billionaires. Well, it's not like they've got any commitment to democracy, really,
right,
or like to democratic institutions. So the question is, could they, make a determination that, well, all right, so if Trump or whatever follows Trump that's better organized and less flamboyant, could just rip the Band-Aid off, then really an authoritarian regime is more in keeping with the people who crafted Prop 22, for instance, right? Than anything else is. And in the absence of Mark Dudzik and I have been describing neoliberalism as capitalism that's effectively eliminated working class opposition, and that's their utopia. So I mean, and I agree with Jane, right? I mean, we've got to come up with some wins between now and 2022. My concern is that, and this is true of the labor movement. I mean, institutional labor is likely as not to spend the first year and a half saying, "Shut up, we got to get behind Biden and Harris," right? Who have made clear to us that their posture is, don't ask me for shit, basically. And some more bullshit about hope, and now with Kamala we got like 12 different fucking firsts, right? To float on, basically, right? But instead of doing anything,
first person to try to prosecute parents for truancy.
Yeah, well, yeah. Although I think that our DA, I think our DA in New Haven in the mid '80s was trying to do that too, though. So she may not have been the first. She wasn't alone, that's for sure.
Oh yeah, right.
But yeah, but still, like we come back to the same things. Like we come back to the movement building work, right? Which is the key, and that's got to come through the labor movement because it's not coming from anywhere else.
Yeah. So, what has to happen? What can happen? What will happen? What wins can Biden be forced to fight for? Because he clearly won't fight for them on his own.
I mean, I think ironically, and I'm sort of like so glad that Trump missed the chance to do a few easy things that if he had done it, he would have won. Right. Really glad he missed doing a few things. So one of them is like infrastructure. right? Like
Right.
something we could win on is a Green New Deal version of an infrastructure in a serious way. Because it's a jobs program. So like running the jobs program in a way that is about stopping crazy forest fires, floods, forest fire. I mean, there's Hurricane Sandy. I mean, when I wrote that one story and I talk about it in the new book of how they won really kind of the best Green New Deal-ish job at a state level, which was in New York around the transition to wind power.
Right.
That happened in part because the unions actually said Hurricane Sandy freaked people out. And in the space that came out of Hurricane Sandy, what people think of as the more stereotypical, the building and construction trades, like a lot of unions that make a stereotype of the hard hat guy, sat down and were traumatized by Sandy because people really experienced it, whether they were, working on the subways or whether they were building something or whether they lost their houses, right? People's houses were flooding in Queens, whatever. So they came out of that experience and said, wow, climate change is like it's a real thing. Like there was this deep dive that was a union only discussion in New York coming off of Sandy. And the people who moved that discussion in my mind were like just brilliant organizers because they were like, oh, here's a moment. What do we do with it? Right. Like in some ways it's a flip of Naomi Klein's shock doctrine. It's like we need the opposite. Like right. What does a left organizer do in response to a shock, right? We should do something very different with every disaster. So the fires and the smoke in the state of California and the forced power outages that have been going on are unbelievable and real. And the flooding is real. And the storms in the Midwest is real. So I think in some interesting way, a Green New Deal, a real infrastructure bill, that's a real jobs program, that's around burying power lines. If you're talking about California, burying power, there is a lot to do. That's a jobs program that could actually be left and smart and pro-future and put a lot of money in a lot of workers' hands. And that should be able to pass. Even that should actually be able to pass a Joe Manchin for sake of argument, right? So it's like if we use him as a bad litmus test, but it's like, so that's at least one thing. And then depending on where the pandemic goes, and how the pandemic goes, the inadequacy of how many people have been thrown out of their healthcare, and the reality of how that's even changing a lot of union discussion about the need for a more universal approach to healthcare. Maybe, but I wouldn't start there because it's like I'd start on jobs. I'd start on green jobs. I'd start on infrastructure, and I'd go for a big win. And in it. I would re-embolden like the small detail stuff we need to do very quickly, which I'm sure is not, by the way, on the to-do list for people right now. It's like we need to very quickly it took the Obama administration 7 years to do some decent work on organizing rights, like workers' right to organize unions. Like that, unlike the second day of the administration is sworn in, assuming that they get sworn in. They need to actually go back to the reason I was in Philly. So I can claim some of that Philly victory too. I'm kidding. But the reason I went to Philadelphia to help seven hospitals worth of people, form brand new unions in 2016 and 2017, which contributed to an expanded progressive base in Philadelphia. Those part of the story is because there was like a fair election process that Obama created, like too little, too late at the very end. So like do that on day one. Do that on day one. Make it so that we can have fair election rules again and seriously expand the union base as we're campaigning for an infrastructure package that's climate friendly and smart and that prioritizes hiring women and people of color and like all the things that you can do in a good jobs program. That's for sure. That's the most likely piece to move, I think.
And the good news is too, there's a lot of stuff that's already on the books that Biden could enforce as, the Constitution, his job is literally to enforce the law. So there's stuff that he could do as far as infrastructure.
If they chose to. But then the other thing is like saving the K through 12 system, like pumping money into the education. I mean, there's frankly several things that we could do that would be really, really that should be something we can do. And I think, and then, of course, I think, continuing to build on the strike movement, like way more strikes by smart state and local unions, I'm losing hope for the, most of the national ones calling for them, although a few could. And sadly, Unite Here, whose actual industry has been decimated. Part of why we have a debt of gratitude to the Unite Here union folks is because everyone has been like laid off, and there was such devastation in their industry that they plowed their genius into all these swing state political races, which was an amazing contribution by the current trade union movement into the political victories. So, but that union could have been a union. I mean, they had a national strike against Marriott, right? So they were running national strikes against a hotel corporation, in the Trump era, which I talk about in the new book too. Like, the point of the new book was I outlined, all these victories that were won once after Trump won. Like, that's what I was doing in a collective bargaining, was saying under Trump, every victory in the new book I wrote happened after Trump took office. And I was trying to make a point that even under really hard circumstances, there's a way to fight and win. And we just have to do a lot more of that kind of fighting and that kind of winning now.
Yeah, and it seems like one of the groups we need to be winning against too are sort of those mealy-mouthed people in the middle you mentioned. And this goes back to the Patagonia Democrats thing. Like, it seems like one of the problems Bernie had in the primary, and was frustrating because it's not an argument or an orientation I agree with, but the idea that he needed to appeal to sort of the middle class cohort that votes in Democratic primaries. Like, if we're a working class movement, I think we should have a working class base. But how do we create that in such a short period of time in order to like beat people in 2022? Is that possible to do, or is that just going to be a much longer term project, like registering working class people to help defeat corporate Democrats?
Oh, I think big wins and big campaigns and big transformation can happen very, very quickly. I mean, if people are committed to running a really good campaign, it does not take long. I mean, that's part of the weird thing about, there's this myth that I confront a lot. People are like, oh, there's the chick who wants to talk about organizing. Oh God, that'll be like 2020. That'll be like 2050, Jane. Doesn't organizing take forever? And I appreciate it. I shouldn't be so cynical, but it's like, it's flat wrong. I mean, again, like, I'm 3 books in now to like showing that when you put the correct resources, you align them correctly, and you get a good, skill and talent mix, you can do hella crazy victories in 6, 8, 9, 12 months. I mean, if they change the fair election rules in terms of unionization elections, if Biden and Harris, flipped and just made union elections fair, even kind of fair again, we could organize half the damn country in the next year, and that's real, right? But the resources and the rulemaking, and it's like road to victory, and it doesn't take long. And the story of Philadelphia, with 7 hospitals, in 12, probably 16 months altogether, but like that could happen all over the country, right? If people got the idea that actually investing in the base and base expansion and going after the 80, I want a map of I want a war room. But first of all, like, we should talk about like what's in a war room. In the war room, I want the 80 million people who could have voted and didn't. Like, we should go organize in the key geographies and the key sectors where the 80 million people are who sat out the election this time around. So like coming up with strategic priorities, how to do it, what's the power analysis, where do we need to go to prioritize the resources? If you do all that smart, we could literally, change a hell of a lot of dynamics in just 2 years. If there's an if in there, but like if, and thank goodness in some of our bigger unions, there are slowly locals getting really well organized who are contending for and challenging some of the sort of priority setting. And we need a lot more of that, right? We need emboldened locals with really good leadership who are going to start leading from below, which we're seeing happen, certainly in the education sector. So that's a good thing. And we need a lot more of that.
I just wanted to read, if that's okay, 2 questions from viewers, and also thank you, TT, for this comment. Riveting and educational conversation. Thanks all. Let's see. Tender Lungs 206 asks, why don't the Black people who came from poor areas like Dr. Dre, Jay-Z, LeBron James, etc., buy all these shut down businesses and hire poor people to stop the cycle? And Jonathan Tipton Myers asks, why is this often framed as race versus class when these two aligned subjects are issue versus strategy, which invalidates race and creates division?
Well, I say the answer to the first question is that that's not what they want to do.
Right.
Right. So, and I mean, the second question, yeah, I'm not quite sure I got the second question, actually. What's the second question again?
Yeah, let's see. And maybe you can rewrite it. What's the name? Tender Lungs. No, not Tender Lungs. Who wrote that? Jonathan Tipton Myers. Why is this often framed as race versus class when those two aligned subjects are issue versus strategy, which invalidates race and creates division? I think he's saying that it's maybe, are you saying that it creates division to emphasize class and not race? I don't know. Can you write that out more clearly?
Come on, Jonathan.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my first response is, I mean, who is phrasing the debate as race versus class? But I'm not, right? And I've written about this too. Like, I don't know a class reductionist, right? But I've not known a person in like 50 years who contends that, while trying to be on the left, who contends that racism, racial injustice are not serious and real problems that need to be confronted. Saying that, though, is kind of like saying, I believe the children of the future, right? Everybody wants to confront it, but what confronting it is the thing. And in my experience, class reductionism is 100% a canard that's used against people who want to argue that you can't attack racial inequality without going through political economy. So
I feel like, yeah.
So I just ask that question as somebody who says it's all about race, basically. Oh, I'm sorry, Jane.
No. Sorry. No, I do. I feel like we sort of hit on that though in the beginning. You know what I mean? Like or earlier in the conversation, that it's not, they're inseparable. Right. Like it's always made me crazy. It's not race versus class versus gender. It's gender and race playing out in the context of class. And and we can never pull them apart. They are so deeply intertwined. But then the question of strategy, I think it goes back to refielding, like rebuilding a real organizing front. And I don't mean, professional, some whole debate about professional, blah, blah, blah. I mean, like skilled, building more experience and skill. We just finished doing this. I mean, I've done like 3 rounds because of the pandemic and Zoom of these like many thousand people trainings in the last 6 months that are trying to just get out of the rhetoric and get into it with people. Like, what does it take to win a campaign? How do you have a hard conversation? How do you identify the person that's most important to identify in the shift or the unit that's going to bring the unit along through the fear, over the racism, through the sexism, all the challenges that we have in every campaign. And, it's not, like I always say about organizing work, it's not rocket science, but actually there is something to it, right? So, I mean, one thing that's been sort of beautiful has been realizing, like watching through the classes that we've been doing, these online huge classes with thousands of people, and then putting them into breakout groups, like actually going into breakouts and then sub breakouts, trained 150 volunteers for the last strike school so that we had enough people to like take people from multi-thousand person Zooms into a breakout where they're practicing a one-to-one organizing conversation in real time with each other and then giving each other feedback. Like that skill matters for us to achieve the kind of gains that we need to achieve. And so that's been a way of like collaborating with the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung to try and get around the fact that there has been, a retrenchment in a lot of the national, not just unions, right? Black Church, fill in the blank, like a lot of the national organizations environmental movement, like kind of across the board, pulled back in the last, that's the whole reason I wrote No Shortcuts, like pulled away from organizing. And part of what I say, and I think you were saying this in the beginning, Adolf, right? It's like, I don't think we've been doing real organizing for decades, not to scale. And when we do it to scale, we win. It's like the whole point of all three of the books I've written is just to keep showing when we do real organizing, when we have hard conversations, when we pick strategic industries, strategic sectors, strategic labor markets, have a sensibility about it and make a plan and a strategy, we actually can win very quickly. And so going around the people who are withholding resources from organizing and just working with Rosa Luxemburg and kicking out these training programs, is an interesting accident of consequence of the pandemic, because you couldn't have paid me to spend time hanging out online thinking that would be an effective way to teach people. And it's not the best, but it's not a bad substitute for the fact that ain't no one teaching people how to do this work anymore, right? It's like this lost art and lost science that we just need a whole lot more of as fast as we can get it.
It just seems like such a non-brainer, by the way, a no-brainer, that if you appeal to people's material interests, that's how you get there to have, like you were saying, Jane, like that's how you have the discussion, or you were saying, Adolf, like it's not by did you use this term, Adolf, a utopian scolding or utopia scolding? Who used that term? It was something, but it's not by shaming people, calling them out, even like calling them in, speaking to their better angels, because why the hell, if you feel like you can't pay your bills or you feel like you're getting left behind, no matter what background you are, like, why the hell do you find it in your heart kind of to have this empathy? It's just not. And then people are so obsessed with just judging people as either redeemable or irredeemable. And the whole, like, we need to stop chasing the mythical white working class. And it's like, okay, if you want to win, if Trump is this existential, unprecedented threat, we need a majority. I mean, it's a numbers game, right? It's not that deep. And how about we do it in a way that like brings people together? It's just, I don't know. Like,
right. It seems like there's this really big investment in just being in total denial with some people on the left that anybody, and I really encountered this, that anybody in the working class might have any sort of like bigotry or, prejudice or anything. And it's like, if you've worked a low wage job, then that's real. But that's why you have to see people not as irredeemable, but, is racism a spectrum, or is it a binary? I think a lot of people think of it as you're either racist or you're not, versus, everyone has their own biases, and the way we work through them is through organizing. Well,
yeah, I think I'd go a little farther than that. I mean, because from one perspective, right, racism, people tend to think of it as a fixed attitude. Yeah. Right. And that's not necessarily the case either, right? Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, you know what I mean? Like if I don't know, like if a blonde guy cuts me off on the highway, right?
We would never do that.
You call him a Nazi.
Blonde asshole, right? I mean, that's
Nazi.
Right, that happens, right? And I've done a lot worse than that. And I suspect maybe all of us have, or at least some of us have. But the
blonde guys have done a little worse than that, by the way.
But the problem with the racism as a thing, right, that lives inside you, is that in the first place, it's wrong, right? Like and I mean, people don't ever define it, right? Right. I mean, what I've said in the past that I mean, this is one of the ways that anti-racism is like anti-terrorism, right? It's a beautiful enemy, right? Because it's not substantial, right? It doesn't live anywhere in particular, and it's not even expressed through any definite set of acts, right? Right. I mean, anything can count as racism, and it's also transhistorical, right? So, like, there's an article in the Times, an expose of Alexander Hamilton a couple of years ago, right? Well, who would be surprised that anybody, right, even abolitionists among the governing property elites in the United States in the late 18th century didn't have some connection with the slave trade, and is just like they, by the way, had connections with the trade and indentured workers, and operated with the crucial distinction between people that own property and people who didn't own property. And just because you dabbled like in the slave trade, or maybe even were aggressively invested in the slave trade, didn't necessarily mean that you hated black people, right? It's just that you knew how to make a good investment, and oh well, they could be like collateral damage. But don't forget, like the governing or the dominant defense of slavery among American elites till the end of the 1830s was that it was a necessary evil, right? And it's necessary so that I get paid, right? But yeah, it's fucked up in a lot of ways, but that's how it is, and that was the defense that worked as long as there was a consensual understanding that political discourse was restricted to a pretty small group of rich property-owning men. And then after that began to break down, like in the face of mass franchise or mass suffrage, then the rationale, it becomes a little more complex, right? It turns out it's a necessary evil, right? Oh, no, sorry. It turns out it's a positive good. Right? It's good for the slaves. It's good for all the rest of us, right, and so forth and so on. But the problem with seeing racism as a thing that's always like an insubstantial thing, right? And seeing that thing as unchanged and unchanging over time, right? Even reading it back into earlier historical periods when the kinds of distinctions that became consolidated about race and race difference by the middle of the 19th century didn't exist, right? It's really like a John Carpenter movie, right? And that doesn't really help us, like, I understand anything, right? But even passing prejudices, or which can come and go, and like I'd even take a case like what the cases that people might think of as when when concupiscent nature comes out, right? Like the pornographic racist things that white people have said during open housing fights or school desegregation fights, for instance. The same people might have said something entirely different on a different day, like in a different context. They might have black friends, and just make that there's all kinds of fluidity out there about that stuff. And certainly with respect to the past, where all of those decisions have been made already anyway, but also for the present, like our job isn't to try to figure out who goes to heaven, who goes to hell, right?
I've got a list. I've got a list though, Adolf.
Huh?
I have a list.
Yeah.
No, me too. And if it's on my mind, I'd like to help them pack and get there. But the last thing I'll say about this too is that notions like systemic racism or of the structural racism need to be explained, right? People toss them out there, and they toss them out there because it feels good, right? There's a kind of tasty heft, right, to invoking them, but nobody ever says what they're supposed to mean, right? Like, so at this point, I would like to start a campaign, call on anybody who uses either one of those phrases, for instance, to have to say, when I say structural racism, I mean, right, A, B, C, D, E, because it's an alternative to explanation. And I mean, going back to your campmates, but an observation, it's significant, right? I mean, there's quite a difference when people who are engaged on the front lines of a struggle for racial justice, as they see it, are targeting specific policies on both coming both ways, right? Both pro and con. And when they're talking about some abstraction that can't be nailed down, because when you get down to it, and like even the Archbishop of anti-racism.
What's her name?
Coates.
Robin DiAngelo? Oh, Ta-Nehisi Coates. Oh.
Oh, well, yeah, well, all of them, right? About that whole cohort. If you assume that racism, again, like, is this thing, right? This sin, and like, this is the way that the liberal academics have talked about it since a Myrdal study, that it's the nation's original sin. It's our it's a disease. No, it's a set of attitudes and expressions that emerge out of a given pattern of social relations. But if they're right, like, if this most radical sounding construct is correct, then, as even they, like the Afro-pessimists, will acknowledge it, then we're fucked, right? There's nothing you can do about it. You can't defeat it. And that's like a luxurious suffering that only people who have healthcare and good jobs and housing and stuff like that can't afford to indulge.
Or it's like a personal exorcism.
Yes,
that's how you defeat it. Like one,
right.
You know, as within your heart.
Right, the body of Mark Garvey tells you.
Yeah.
So you're telling me I can't get my racism gland removed?
Yeah.
Dr. Ibram X. Kendi can't extract that from my brain?
I will say, I mean, in a slightly counterintuitive way, before going back to the point about race, class, and gender together.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I do remember when I was, I don't know how old I was. You know, I was young. I was working at the Highlander Center, so it's like early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And I got dragged in by Ann Braden. I forget who. I got dragged. I went to some like Undoing Racism. It was called Undoing Racism training in New Orleans when I was whatever young, right, a long ass time ago. And there was some of this stuff in it, but it was being done by sort of left, more radical working class folks. And I would say that there were just enough participatory good things that made you really, really, really more, for people who hadn't thought about it, which I wouldn't say that I was in that category, but it was not bad to dwell and be forced to really contemplate sort of the level of white privilege, like literally what it means to have white skin privilege. So, you know, some of that stuff is good. It's just, it's not going to get us there. No. And part of why I go back to why I'm going to say unions are a pain in the ass and then get right past it and get to why they matter so much is coming back to this point, which is like, I mean, I go to this example of the Filipinas and the white nurses, and I can do it with white nurses and black nurses. And because for me, it's interesting to stay in the train of gender for a minute. Like so much of my union organizing work is among women, whether it's the healthcare sector or the education sector, it's like dominated by women. So I'm already like getting out of the stereotype of like racism and like linked to white men, because actually it's a whole lot of white women where there's issues. And you know, and I like going to the Filipina nurses. I mean, the West Coast is just filled with Filipina nurses, right? That's by strategic design by the bosses. They're flying them in to try and bring the wages down. I mean, it's pretty cookie cutter. But so, and that's different than the East Coast where I organize, where it's more Jamaican and, hey, you know, it's a different Puerto Rican, it's a different subset that the bosses are trying to divide and conquer with. But on the West Coast, when I moved from organizing healthcare workers on the East Coast to moving to the West Coast, it was this constant confrontation of racism, really anti-immigrant, kind of anti-Filipina racism by a lot of white nurses until the union campaign began. And how quickly, like in several months, people who thought they had these like long entrenched like ideas in their head, how quickly one good campaign like radically shifted their understanding of the world. And when their understanding of the world shifted, they no longer had a reason to be shitty to Filipina nurses, right? And there was like, I would go to the Filipina nurses in a campaign and they'd be like, we're sick of those white nurses. You know, they give us the shittiest shifts. They give us, and it was all true. It's all true. Now you could call that structural racism, or you could just say like, no one's ever helped people understand why the bosses on the West Coast in the hospital sector are endlessly flying in nurses that they think they can abuse from the Philippines on special visa statuses, right? And when you and I do think that workers are smart. I think ordinary people are. I've met more interesting, brilliant, ordinary people than. Sorry, I'm just going to make a little thing. Then, like my time in academia, it's like, oh my God, really? There's brilliant workers all over this country whose energy and genius we're never going to tap because there's so much cynicism about who's smart and who's not. And when I was having those early conversations over and over and over, because we got to 9 out of 10 nurses in Nevada organized. It's the highest nurse density in the United States of America by the end of that 4 years of campaigning. And so constantly dealing with the question of immigrant language, white nurse racism, and oppressed sort of Filipinas. And then all of it would get, I'm serious about how much of this issue got solved in one good campaign at a time to build a level of solidarity where every time a white nurse said to me, the Filipinos, only speak in Tagalog, or the Filipinos won't go on strike if the rest of us do because they're going to be too scared of their visa. And literally me looking at white nurses and very nicely saying over and over, why do you think the employer has brought them here? And then really engaging that question, like in a slow, like what, just tell me why you think. And then the nurses will say, well, to pay them less. Okay. That now we're getting somewhere. Correct. That, and I would be like, exactly. Right. Like that's right. So good step. So the employer is bringing them here to pay them less. So what do you think that's going to do to your wages and your possibilities of getting more staff and a pension? Well, it's probably, and then you just shut up and let them think for a minute. Mm-hmm. And then they actually start figuring out, holy shit, the boss is pulling one over on us here. You know what I mean? And then they actually work it out. And then we go through a strike and then they build huge solidarity and they start having families coming out together. And then we're having strike victories together. And suddenly everyone's breaking bread and having a great time. And you know what? Those people are radically different. And their racism is fundamentally, I'm not saying it's gone, but it's like they even recognize it. They understand that they were doing something wrong, and they don't understand that because I stood up and lectured them. I continuously posed a series of questions in a class-based context about why do you think the boss is flying all of those people here? And then let's work through that material gain question about getting more nurses on the shifts or getting a pension or getting fully employer paid healthcare for you and your family or whatever, because then they're going to realize we got way more in common than we do with the asshole on top.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you guys all questions about the election, and Jane, your stories about Florida, but I think we've gone on. I mean, this has been so great, and I'm very appreciative of how generous you guys have been with your time.
Can I ask Adolf one quick question to see if I can get a hot scoop?
Sure.
I watched the talk you did with Willie Leggett on South Carolina, and I'm wondering if there's any chance, I don't know if he's in the same district, but is there any chance that Willie Leggett will primary Jim Clyburn?
It's funny you mention that because he just ran for a state house seat in Orangeburg, but it wasn't a real campaign. I mean, we just ran him, to keep the ballot line that we have for a South Carolina on Labor Party. But no, I mean, look, Clyburn, running against Clyburn in a campaign is a suicide mission, right? And like what we've been trying to do, because we're still working down here, and we're not really focused on electoral stuff at all, except to get a handle on it, right? And who's doing what, but we're focused more on actually, especially since the pandemic, right? I'm operating through institutions like the president of the state Fed is a close ally, and we're building relationships with other unions like the teachers organization is great, and the woman who's the president of it is fabulous. We're trying to build a close relationship with her, and I mean Clyburn. Willie, by the way, has known Jamie Harrison since Harrison was a kid, and he said that Harrison was always had his eye on the main chance and his lips pursed to find the right ass, and he And like he's like everybody else in South Carolina, or like every other black Democrat with aspirations, is hoping they're close enough to Clyburn to be tapped as his successor. But no, I mean,
he's unbeatable.
Right. Yeah.
Because he's the most progressive, as he said the other day about himself. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah. Oh no, I didn't. But
Yeah.
but I do know that this is the guy. And see, there's a story there too, obviously, about how they played this whole black vote thing. But when Clyburn finally stopped being coy and announced his support for Biden, he actually said that as far as he was concerned, the race was between Biden and Medicare for all. So that's just kind of...
He's like the biggest recipient of pharmaceutical.
He is.
Yeah.
Right. Over $1 million in 10 years. And that buys a lot of political clout in the state of South Carolina. See, and that's something else about the electoral stuff. And maybe this is a different discussion to have at a different point. But resources in most electoral contests will beat no resources, right?
Yep.
Most of the time. And another practice that the Democrats seem to have fallen into in their general kind of American Idol approach to like electoral politics. So I mean, like last time we had like Beto and Stacey Abrams, who created this new category called the almost victor, right? So you find an improbable candidate to run against and a very probable kind of Republican opposition, raise a shitload of money, and this was the same thing happened with Jamie this time. But raise $100 million and almost win, and then what happens is the almost victor gets to follow a new career path as like a kingmaker within the party. Beto kind of faltered because his white chocolate Obama act wasn't as good as Mayor Pete's white chocolate Obama act. So I don't know what the hell he's doing now.
And as we all know, white chocolate is not actually chocolate.
True. But it can be tasty.
We invented that, but yeah, you just split me open on the American Idol approach, and the almost victor.
Yeah.
But sorry, I don't know if I'm interrupting you on that point, but like that goes back to that same issue of like the money that's going to get thrown into Georgia right now, the money that's going to get, like, I am pleading with people. I'll just say it. I mean, if people go to my website, people are interested. Like I've put the two main sort of action fund, like the ways that everyone should put money into Georgia if they feel like they want to, because people just do want to, is not into any national candidate. It's not into the national party. It's not to any of them. Right. It's to the base organizations that are knocking on door, that live there, that are from there, that are actually, that know their state, and that are not under some delusion that they're going to pull 2 Senate seats. But we know that the more we invest in the base, the more real it's going to become. I do believe at some point we will take Texas, and it's not going to happen because of the American Idol almost victor candidate. It's going to happen because there are some unions. There's the education sector. Like there's really good people on the ground, right. Latino, Black organizations, and also really great unions, and they're all mixing it up, and they're doing dogged day in and day out work. And every time I think about like the money thrown to McGrath in Kentucky, right. Like you think you're gonna, like when people like innocent people who just don't follow this stuff every day and don't know it, and neighbors of mine are like, oh, I sent some money to McGrath. Do you think, Jane, do you think, literally at the mailboxes, do you think we have a chance of taking out McConnell? And I'm like, did you just send a check to Kentucky? Like seriously, imagine if that money had a year ago gone into all the base organizations in Georgia. Do you think we would stand a better chance of winning something in Georgia right now if the kind of money that they dump into these ridiculous races had been being strategically targeted into base level organizations who have a realistic understanding of what it's going to take to win their states? It's just different strategy needed completely.
Jamie Harrison has a deceptively cute baby face. He seems so sweet.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Dangerous.
Well, I mean, I'd say to that, Jane. Obviously, I agree completely. And part of the deal too, like especially in states like Kentucky, and they did it before in Tennessee, Texas too, is that feeds the appeal of the conservative Democratic candidate, right?
Yeah.
Right. Because McGrath's claim to fame was he was
Air Force,
Air Force, Marine pilot, some shit, whatever.
Yeah.
And she's like soft on, or she's on all the conventional, the new Democrat issues. Like she's not even there, which is not even really like pro reproductive rights or any of that stuff.
right?
No. Anyway, yeah, it's crazy. Speaking of people, another, the constituency we don't need to go look for that people consistently ignore on the left too is veterans. Speaking of what day it is, but like the number of working, like the real working class people who are sacrificing their lives. Like I keep thinking, another massively untapped. Like if I was just doling out the money, we'd be building veterans organizations out of the attack on the Veterans Administration, out of the VA. And their hospitals and healthcare system, we'd be doing all of that. There's so much good work to do right now if the resources were being strategically aligned, and resources do matter, which is another reason why we got to build unions. Just saying.
That's so funny because literally a super chat just came in that I was about to read. From Chia Sin Phi. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. I really love this and really find this hopeful. Weird, I know. Combat veteran. The person writing is a combat veteran and want to get your opinion on if trying to organize veterans to save GI benefits and socialists is a project worthwhile pursuing.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. There was this moment. That is funny timing. There was a moment. This is in 2012 because I know I was in the PhD program, and some national group wanted me to consult with them about like a better version of the conversation of like where was some untapped constituency, like what were we missing? And Astrid Taylor and the really good work around the debtor stuff hadn't started yet, but that is another example of like a good constituency that's organizable, or debtors, right? If we do it right. But anyway, another one and at that moment, Walmart had just announced. And I have family, who were in Iraq, sadly, kids, young ones in my family who saw that as both the right thing to do because whoever it was on the news that night after 911 told them to, and they went and jumped. Right. They're all Bernie people now, by the way. Every young person in my
huge
family,
veterans, right? Population.
They're all Bernie people, and deeply so. And they're still like young. I mean, they're in their young 30s now, and they're like disgusted with anyone who's not Bernie Sanders, just for starters.
Same.
And secondly, there was this moment in 2012 when Walmart announced that they were going to hire 100,000 returning veterans from Afghanistan. It was like an Obama, some deal was cut, Hillary, I don't know. It was like, and Walmart announced that they were going to hire 100,000. They committed to 100,000 veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan that they were going to hire in 2012. And I literally was like, I wish some fairy godmother would just give me the money at that moment to go organize the 100,000 veterans around things that they really needed and send them as the salts into Walmart to take Walmart. Like you really can figure out power and strategy if you're putting your brains to it. So yeah, we should be talking to veterans. And and the attack on the Veterans Administration, which, by the way, was completely bipartisan, is just disgusting. The VA healthcare system is an extraordinary healthcare system, and that has been a bipartisan attack to destroy it. And it is so easy to go out and get veterans upset about that at the grassroots level all over this country. Anywhere there's a VA, we should be organizing around a better vision of you don't have to say, this is a socialist form of healthcare. You just say every veteran actually obviously deserves lifetime of healthcare when they come home. By the way, there's like 96% approval of the Veterans Administration by veterans because it's a really good healthcare system, even though it's being destroyed intentionally with bipartisan support. So it's like you just hold, and that's the same kind of beautiful conversation I've had with people, like ordinary people. And you start so how do you think why is your healthcare so good? You just start walking veterans through what they like about their healthcare system, and you can leap very quickly to a lot of other really good issues. So
IDW said, that's me, ex-military, never had any organizers approach me.
Yeah.
And then someone else said it would be hard to get, sorry, I can't find it, but someone said it would be hard to get where is it? Military on board. But I think that also, easy in some ways, like you were saying, Jane. It's like, do you like the way, your healthcare works?
Mhm.
And again, you don't have to dress it in the language of socialism.
Ever. Don't socialists, please don't dress these conversations in the
No.
language of socialism. Don't do that and stick
Do
to
the
like
language
what
of
matters.
Kautskyism.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, yeah.
And then just going to read a couple more, which you guys can respond to whichever ones you want to. Rideshare advocate here. How aware are labor organizers of new union busting goals of tech and Prop 22, which is to wipe out W-2 and then people? Someone wants to talk. We talked about this earlier on, but Bernie as John Smith wants to know about if we can talk about Bernie as Secretary of Labor. I've read he wants that position. We talked about that earlier, but
We can definitely talk about it.
Yeah, Anders and I can.
All we can do about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Stephanie,
it's also like a low bar in my opinion. Like he should be Secretary of State. I hate the idea that he should be in labor. It's like, really?
No, I think he should stay in the Senate, though. Also, stay in the Senate.
Yeah.
Stephanie Welch writes, Adolf and Jane, two of my favorite guests. I do hope you write a series of pieces together. Are there any examples of allegiances you've seen forming that most people wouldn't believe was possible? Great conversation. David Devoid Reality says, great conversation tonight. Thank you all. Maybe part 2 after Biden finalizes his cabinet. Schultze 100 says, fuck yeah, Jane. He should just, about Bernie, he should just give Biden a good slap in the face and tell him, wise up, boy, or even you're nothing to me, nothing. That'd be a good thing. Yeah.
If you only had done that in that debate.
Well, I mean, I talked about that with Chuck Rocha and Linda Sarsour the other day. By the way, Linda and I are sending people to hell who hate Bernie. Those people are canceled. You guys talk about heaven and hell.
Okay.
Bernie haters, I just don't understand them. And then, I guess I have a question about 2000 and your really interesting story, Jane, but it's late. I don't want to, unless you're really revving to talk more.
I'm not revving. I'm happy to take one more question.
Okay.
I'm not revving.
Well, I
gotta get up and actually write like a 2022 strike plan. That's all I'm saying. So
okay. So why don't we can, well, one question really quickly, just because everyone was talking about, thinking about, wants to know about what Trump is going to do, whether he can steal the election. And what are your thoughts as someone who was there in 2000 with Bush, with that election and the Brooks Brothers thugs? What are your thoughts on that compared to where we are now?
It's not going to look like the Brooks Brothers, right? Like these guys learn, we don't. So it's not going to look the same. I think I'm sticking to the point I've been making since before Election Day and every day since, which is it's an enormous strategic mistake that we have not put people in streets in very large numbers already. It needed to be done the day after. I've tried to be polite about this, but I think the idea that protect the results, like had all the names, all the list, all the cell phones, all the emails, of like all the people that needed to take to the streets, to say, by the way, your side lost. I mean, I don't care if it was close, we beat you, and you're gonna get the fuck out of the White House, right? Like we need to be peacefully, non-violently, super high roady. Bring out the puppets, bring out the whatever, like really like the right messaging. We know how to do this, but our side has needed and needs to be in the streets, strategically and wisely. And for the unions and the Black church and the fill in the blanks, like the institutional players to be currying access and favors and dreams of, how many times you're going to be in the White House starting soon versus being willing to break with Biden and Harris and the top Democrats right now and say, like, we love you, but actually having a left flank, a smart one in the streets, like creating the space to let ordinary people express what I always just use my neighborhood and whatever, like people around me as examples of there's so much pent up energy right now. And there's so much of a need to be not demobilizing like that our side is being demobilized while the right is being mobilized, is a very, very, very big mistake. And that, I think we're going to pay the consequence of it very quickly. And the lesson I was thinking about today is So now we're seeing that the right, is organizing, right? Hello, like, of course, seeing it, like, of course they were going to organize. Of course, this guy was not going to give up. He said he wasn't going to give up. So, I get these lectures from like the grownups. I call them the grownups in the movement, who call me in response to something I tweet, and they say, Jane, this is going to be done. This is not Florida. This is not Florida. Okay. By the way, it's not Florida. In fact, things are way worse right now.
Right.
So, it's not Florida. You're right. But the response of demobilizing versus mobilizing is a huge mistake. And I worry, the thing I say at the end of that chapter in the first book that Jacobin reran, is that there was this moment where me and many people have been saying over and over, we need to get in the street. And I don't just mean get in the streets. Like, anyone who knows what I really think getting in the streets is not organizing is my favorite thing, which is not but there are moments when you need to get in the streets, right? And there was this moment at the end of the Florida recount where I got a phone call from an unnamed higher up, who I'd been fighting with the entire time for like 33 days straight, I think, in Florida, about what the strategy needed to be. And then I get this phone call near the end. The Brooks Brother riots happened. It's over. It's basically over. The Supreme Court's going to take it. Everything is like looking horrific, even though Gore actually won the state. And then I get this phone call from like one of the very, very, very top people at the National AFL-CIO, and they're like, McAlevey, you get to do it. You get to put him in the street now. We need a huge rally tomorrow in Miami. Now, what do you need to do it? And I was just like, do you not understand anything about how this works? Like, you can't turn the switch off on human agency intentionally, like refuse to let people go into the streets and then just turn them on 33 days later. And I am really worried right now that that's what's going to happen, that they're going to wake up in like a week and realize, oh shit, like we should have actually created a counter narrative and reinforced the idea in a really peaceful way that, by the way, our side won. We won this. And the numbers aren't in yet, whether it's 75 million to 71 million. I think it's going to be more like 78 million to 70. Like, we haven't even counted a bunch of votes in California yet. So the number is going to be even bigger. And we should just claim the real number. And people need to express that we've won this thing. And it's time for you to get out of there. And so anyway, but my main thing right now is like that I'm obsessed with this concern. And people call and say, but the CEOs are lined up and Wall Street's lined up and, everyone is behind getting him out. And so we're just going to I think he is going to get out. I do. I think he's going to get out. I believe that. But demobilizing is the exact wrong thing to do when governing and winning anything is going to be hella hard. And our side needs to be mobilized, not demobilized. And that is my primary commentary on the analogies right now to Florida are those. And it's like keeping me up every single night right now, every night. And it's not PTSD from Florida. It's reading the House. It's reading Trump. It's reading ordinary people who are starting to get depressed again. Like, is this guy ever going to go away? And we need to say, get out, and say it politely and peacefully. And we need ministers leading it and we need unions leading it. And they're all like jockeying for access right now. And that is a mistake.
I'm going to let the interviewees, I'm going to release them back into the wild of
good. Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, Jane, it's great to see you as always.
Thanks.
Great to see you. Great to see you.
Great to
Thanks
see you
for
guys.
having Adolf and I together, and I hope it was
It was
helpful.
fun. It was great. Yeah, it was really great.
Fabulous. Have a
Great.
good one.
Thanks,
Yeah,
you
take
too.
care.
Bye. And that was my interview with the great Jane McAlevey, who sadly died on July 7th of cancer. She was, as you saw, a great union organizer and a great person, and she'll be sorely missed. And so we wanted to honor her by playing that interview that we did. That was from November of 2020, if you can believe it. So rest in power, Jane. And thank you all so much for watching the show tonight. Again, I'm traveling right now, working on a documentary about Holocaust survivors speaking out against the genocide in Gaza. If you are in Ireland, I'll be doing a live taping there on July 24th at 7 p.m. in Dublin at the Fombley Stables. And the link to the tickets is in the description below. The show is going to be great. It's going to be about the connections between Ireland and Palestine, and it's going to feature special guests who are Irish and Palestinian. And those special guests are Tag Hickey, Danny Morrison, and Assad Abu Shark, and the musical guests are Sean Mulroney and Aziz Abu Shark. And again, to everyone out there who knew Jane or just read Jane, she is gone too soon, and what a loss, but she left such a treasure trove of work. And so we're so grateful to her for that work and her books and her writing and her organizing. Thank you so much, everyone, and we will see you next week. Bye.
Okay, I'm down.